It started with the sound of barking outside my kitchen window. Not frantic, not aggressive, just loud, persistent, and oddly joyful. I looked up from my coffee and saw her for the first time. A lean young woman in worn jeans and a faded hoodie, earbuds tucked into her ears, one hand gripping the leash of an enormous golden retriever who seemed entirely unaware of its size. She was laughing, not at anything in particular, just laughing as the dog tried to chase a squirrel up the old oak tree in my front yard. There was something completely unself-conscious about her presence, like she existed slightly outside of time, untouched by the weight of worry or pretense. I watched her for longer than I should have, fingers still wrapped around the warmth of the mug, breath slowing, heart strangely aware. I learned her name later, through the neighborhood grapevine, the way everything spreads here. Casual, inevitable. She had just moved in across the street, renting a room in that weathered blue house that always looked like it was one season away from collapse. A breakup, people said. She needed space. She brought almost nothing with her but that dog and 2 suitcases. No car, no furniture, just a smile, long legs, and an animal that adored her. We began running into each other on the sidewalk, always by accident, always polite. Her dog liked mine. That was the excuse we used. The animals wagged and sniffed, pulling at their leashes in delighted chaos, and we stood nearby, offering the same practiced words each time, about weather, pets, traffic. I noticed the way her smile lingered after the conversation ended. I noticed the little skip in my chest when she waved from across the street. I told myself it was neighborly, familiar, nothing more. Then came the leak, water pouring through the ceiling of her rental, mold blooming behind cheap drywall, the landlord unavailable and uninterested. She knocked on my door one evening, her voice steady but her eyes uncertain. She wasn't asking for much, just a shower, maybe a couch for a few days, something temporary. I hesitated for a beat too long, not because I doubted her, but because something inside me stirred at the idea of her being in my space. Then I stepped aside. Of course, I said. Of course. She came with a duffel bag slung over one shoulder and her dog trotting faithfully behind. Her steps were soft, but her presence filled the house almost immediately. She moved like someone who had grown up in shared rooms, comfortable with making herself small and unassuming, but there was nothing invisible about her. She smelled like wind and soap and something faintly floral. She wore a worn flannel shirt that hung loosely over her frame, sleeves rolled to her elbows. She stood in my hallway and looked around with a kind of gentle curiosity, as if she were cataloging every detail but would never ask to change a thing. I led her to the guest room, neutral, simple, rarely used, and she thanked me with a nod more than words. The dog curled up by the bed as if it had always belonged there. I heard her unpacking that night, not hurriedly, but slowly, like she intended to memorize where every item landed. Later, when I passed by the room to turn off the porch light, I saw the soft glow from her lamp casting a golden ring on the floor, her shadow moving inside it as she read. She looked peaceful, settled, like someone who had stopped running, even if only for a little while. The next morning felt different. The sound of paws on the kitchen tile, the smell of toast, the low hum of her voice singing softly under her breath. I walked in to find her barefoot, feeding the dogs, her hair still damp from a shower. She turned and smiled at me like it was the most natural thing in the world, like she had always been here. Something in my chest tightened, but I smiled back. Days passed. She stayed. She washed dishes without being asked, folded laundry she found in the dryer, left little notes on the fridge about milk and eggs. She never imposed, never overstepped. And yet, without trying, she filled every corner. Her books began appearing on the coffee table. One of her jackets hung beside mine at the door. The couch cushion held the imprint of her curled-up form. She talked to the dog like it was her child, told stories about places she'd never visited, lit candles that made the house smell like cinnamon and cedarwood. I found myself listening for her footsteps in the morning. I caught myself watching the way her hands moved when she chopped vegetables, or how she tilted her head when she read. I scolded myself for being too aware, but I couldn't help it. There was something about the rhythm we fell into. Quiet, unforced, like she had stepped into my life without knocking, and somehow it made the silence less empty. One evening, I walked into the living room and saw her asleep on the couch, the dog at her feet, her arm thrown loosely over her eyes. The lamp cast a soft light over her face, highlighting the line of her jaw, the curve of her lips. I stood there for a long time, watching. I didn't know what I was feeling, not exactly, but I knew something had shifted, and I knew it wouldn't go back to the way it was. She had been in my home less than a week, and already I couldn't imagine it without her. The day settled into a rhythm so seamlessly it startled me. There was no conversation about expectations, no formal agreements or awkward boundaries. She simply became part of my days, and I let her. The mornings began with soft movement, bare feet against tile, the rattle of a dog's leash, the muted clink of mugs. I would wake to the scent of coffee already brewed, sometimes toast, sometimes oatmeal, and the sound of her humming under her breath in the kitchen. I never told her how comforting that was, how it soothed a part of me I hadn't realized was aching. Her presence didn't feel like an intrusion. It felt like the return of something I hadn't known I was missing. She moved through the house with a quiet familiarity that was neither careless nor calculated. Her things started blending with mine, her dog leash on the hook next to my keys, her damp towel hanging beside mine in the bathroom, a stack of books on the side table with a bookmark peeking out from the pages. She read constantly, always something different, memoirs, poetry, thick novels with weathered spines. I began to notice the way she sat curled up on the couch, knees to her chest, one hand absent-mindedly stroking the dog's ears while her eyes moved across the page. She looked peaceful like that, far away but completely grounded, and something in me relaxed just watching her. We shared the small tasks of the day like we'd always done it: groceries, laundry, trash runs. I found myself coordinating my schedule around hers, lingering in the living room if she was there, choosing to wash dishes when she was nearby, just to be close. Our conversations stayed easy and unassuming, surface level for the most part, but layered with glances, with the way her hand would brush against mine when we passed each other in the narrow hallway. There were no declarations, no lingering questions, just this constant, quiet draw toward her. She had this way of claiming space without making it feel taken. She brought candles that smelled like sage and vanilla, played music I didn't recognize but found myself loving, rearranged the fruit bowl on the counter without asking. I never minded. In fact, I started to wait for her changes. Her energy moved like sunlight across a room, slow, soft, but undeniable. The house began to change with her in it, not just physically, but atmospherically. The quiet wasn't empty anymore. It pulsed with something warm. She cooked in a way that felt instinctive, throwing things together, trusting taste over measurement. I watched her one night as she stood at the stove, sleeves pushed up, a strand of hair falling into her face, brow furrowed in concentration. She was barefoot again, her toes tapping along to the beat of a song I didn't know. She made something spicy and sweet and entirely new. When we sat down to eat, our knees touched beneath the table. I didn't move mine, neither did she. We walked the dogs in the evening, the air cooling around us, the light softening. Our steps matched without effort. Sometimes we didn't speak at all, just let the night settle between us. Her shoulder would brush against mine when we turned corners. Her laugh would echo off the trees when one of the dogs did something clumsy. I memorized that laugh. I stored it in some private, tucked-away place inside me. And sometimes, when she looked at me, really looked, It felt like she could see the part of me that was starting to stir again, the part I had folded down and left untouched for years. She began wearing my clothes, not obviously, not in a possessive way, a sweatshirt here, a pair of socks there. The first time I noticed, she was sitting on the floor in my oversized hoodie, legs crossed, sketching something in a notebook. The sleeves hung past her hands. She looked so natural in it, like it had always been hers. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The sight of her like that filled me with something I couldn't quite name. At night, we would end up on the couch, tangled up in blankets, a show playing in the background neither of us paid much attention to. Sometimes our legs would press together, or her head would rest near my shoulder. The contact was casual, easy, but it lingered long after. I could feel the shape of her thigh against mine even after she got up. My skin would remember the weight of her head resting beside me. I stopped pretending that I didn't notice. I just didn't know what to do with it. Her dog and mine became inseparable. They followed each other from room to room, slept side by side, barked in unison at passing cars. She joked once that they had imprinted on each other. I thought about that word, imprinted. It stayed with me. I began to wonder if I was imprinting on her in the same way, if something permanent was quietly forming beneath our shared routine. She moved with a kind of lightness, but there was depth in her silences. I could see it in the way she stared out the window sometimes, lost in thought, or in how her fingers tapped out patterns on her knee when she was trying not to cry during a movie. I watched those moments carefully, held them close. She let me see pieces of herself in flashes, glimpses of something raw, untamed, honest. I found myself craving those flashes more and more. Every night I told myself I was imagining it, that the way her hand lingered on my shoulder wasn't anything, that the way I felt when she smiled at me was just the comfort of companionship, that this tension stretching between us wasn't dangerous. But the truth was, it didn't feel like imagination. It felt like waiting, like holding my breath before something irreversible. And I wasn't sure anymore if I wanted to exhale. The storm rolled in late, without warning, as if the sky had decided to come undone all at once. The power flickered twice before surrendering completely, leaving the house in a quiet, pulsing darkness, interrupted only by the sharp cracks of thunder and the steady pounding of rain against the windows. I stood in the hallway barefoot, listening to the wind rattle the glass and shake the branches outside, the dogs already curled close to the ground in nervous submission. The air inside felt heavier, as if it too had been pulled taut by the tension in the sky. I was just about to retreat to my bedroom when I saw her standing at the end of the hallway, holding a blanket loosely in her arms, her silhouette lit only by the occasional flash of lightning. Her face was calm but alert, eyes already adjusting to the dark, posture soft but uncertain. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. I stepped back and let the door to my room open wider, and without hesitation, she stepped inside. She laid the blanket at the foot of the bed like it belonged there. The dog jumped up without waiting for permission and circled twice before settling. She slid under the covers beside me, quietly, the mattress barely shifting beneath her weight. For a moment, we both lay still, backs turned slightly, the space between us fragile and deliberate. I listened to the rain, the low, rhythmic hum of it soaking the roof, and tried to match my breath to the storm, to slow the rush of my thoughts, but it was impossible. I could feel her, even without touching, her warmth, her presence, her breath rising and falling just inches away from mine. I tried to sleep. I tried to think about ordinary things, grocery lists, work, bills, but every time I closed my eyes, my awareness circled back to her body beside me. I could hear the soft shifts of fabric against skin, the subtle creak of the bed springs as she adjusted her position. Then her knee brushed against the back of my leg, so lightly it could have been an accident, and I stopped breathing. The touch wasn't intrusive. It didn't demand anything, but it lit something in me that I couldn't ignore. The contact was brief, barely there, but my skin burned in its wake. She didn't pull away. A few minutes passed, silent, thick, suspended, and then she moved again, this time rolling onto her side, the bed dipping slightly under the shift. Her arm brushed mine, the heat of her body now undeniable. I could feel it in the air between us, vibrating with tension that hadn't been there the night before. My thoughts scattered. I tried to keep my hands still, my breathing slow. I tried to convince myself that this was just sleep, just a storm, just two people sharing a bed out of necessity. But the truth was, nothing about it felt innocent. When I turned slightly to face her, I could make out the outline of her face in the dim light. Her eyes were open, watching me. There was no hesitation in her gaze, only a quiet intensity that mirrored my own. I didn't know who moved first. Maybe it was me, maybe it was her. But suddenly the space between us was gone. Her forehead was near mine, her breath warm and steady. Our hands met in the middle of the bed, brushing fingers, then slowly locking together, palm to palm. My heart pounded, my skin tingled with awareness, and still neither of us spoke. Her fingers ran lightly over the back of my hand, tracing, learning, like she had all the time in the world. She exhaled softly, and I felt it against my cheek. Her touch moved up my wrist, slow and deliberate, until it reached the inside of my elbow. She paused there, her thumb pressing gently into the crease of my arm, grounding me. I was trembling, not with fear, but with anticipation. I had never been this aware of another person before. Every inch of my body alert, every nerve standing on edge. When her hand slid to my waist, resting there with the lightest pressure, I didn't flinch. I turned toward her fully, closing the last of the distance. Our legs tangled beneath the covers, skin brushing skin. My face hovered just inches from hers. The air around us was thick with something unspoken but undeniable. I could smell the faint sweetness of her skin, feel the heat radiating from her chest. My lips parted without thinking, not for words, but for breath, for space, for her. And then her lips touched mine. It was soft, almost shy, more breath than pressure. But it was real. It was honest. It was the thing we'd both been avoiding for weeks now, finally surfacing in the dark. I kissed her back, slowly, letting myself melt into it, into her. Her hand slipped beneath my shirt, fingertips tracing the small of my back, sending shivers up my spine. I didn't stop her. I didn't want to. I pressed closer, my thigh sliding between hers, our bodies molding together as if they had always known how. The kiss deepened. Our mouths moved in rhythm, unhurried but hungry. My hands found her hips, pulled her nearer. She responded with a soft gasp, her fingers tightening against my ribs. The sheets rustled around us, tangled and forgotten. Her knee nudged my thigh, opening me, and I didn't resist. There was no shame, only heat, only the sharp, beautiful ache of something long denied breaking through. She kissed my neck, my shoulder, the space just beneath my collarbone. Her hand cupped my breast, and I arched into her touch without thinking, without fear. Everything about her felt like discovery, new but familiar, like I'd known this would happen in some secret part of myself I'd never dared to name. Her mouth was warm and reverent, her body pressing into mine with a quiet confidence that made me ache deeper. I ran my hands along her back, her spine, her waist, feeling her tremble against me. When she moved over me, her leg between mine, her breath catching in my ear, I opened for her, pulled her close, let her in. There were no words, only breath, only motion, only the rhythm of skin against skin, and the storm outside, still raging, now matched by the storm inside me. And in that moment, I didn't think about what it meant. I didn't think about tomorrow. I only knew her, the shape of her, the weight of her, the heat. We stayed like that until the thunder faded, until our breathing slowed, until the silence returned and the room grew still again. Her arm draped across my waist, her forehead resting against my shoulder. I didn't move. I just lay there, my fingers tracing slow circles on her back, feeling more alive than I had in years. Something had changed, something irreversible, but it didn't feel frightening. It felt like truth, like we had finally arrived at a place that had been waiting for us all along. The morning after felt different, but not in the way I had expected. There was no rush of regret, no confusion tangled in the sheets, no abrupt distance between us. Only a quiet stillness, like the house itself was holding its breath, unwilling to disturb what had settled between us in the dark. When I woke, she was still there, her arm draped over my waist, her leg resting loosely across mine, the rhythm of her breath slow and steady against my shoulder. I didn't move. I barely blinked. I just lay there and listened to the silence wrap itself around us like another layer of skin. Her warmth lingered on my body long after she slipped out of bed. I heard the soft pad of her footsteps down the hallway, the gentle creak of floorboards under her weight. The dogs stirred but didn't bark, as if they too sensed the shift in the atmosphere. I stayed in bed longer than usual, my eyes fixed on the ceiling, my fingers curled around the edge of the sheet that still held the shape of her. My body ached in ways I couldn't explain, not from pain, but from the weight of something vast and unspoken settling into my bones. I dressed slowly, deliberately, each movement echoing with memory. Her touch still lived on my skin. My lips still tingled from the way she had kissed them, slowly, deeply, as if memorizing every curve. When I finally stepped into the kitchen, she was there, barefoot and quiet, holding a mug of coffee in both hands, her hair tied back loosely, the collar of her t-shirt slipping off one shoulder. She didn't look at me right away. She stared out the window as if the garden beyond held answers to questions neither of us could ask aloud. When she did glance at me, it wasn't with shock or shame. It was with something softer, heavier. A silent recognition of what we had crossed. The day unfolded in small, suspended gestures. We didn't speak about the night before. We moved through the house like we always had, washing dishes, folding towels, feeding the dogs. But there was something new threading itself through everything, an awareness that couldn't be undone. Every time we passed each other in the hallway, I felt it in the air, the magnetism, the pull, the way her arm would graze mine, and my breath would catch in my throat. I could no longer pretend that these touches were incidental. They weren't, not anymore. In the afternoon, I found her on the porch, curled up in my old chair with her sketchbook open on her knees. Her pencil moved in slow, thoughtful strokes, and she didn't look up when I stepped outside. I sat across from her, knees drawn up to my chest, the breeze lifting the edges of my shirt, my heartbeat louder than the wind chimes overhead. I watched her draw, studied the furrow in her brow, the way her bottom lip tucked under her teeth in concentration. I wanted to reach across the space between us, to run my fingers along her jaw, to kiss that focus away, but I didn't. I stayed still. The moment felt too delicate to disrupt. She looked up once, eyes meeting mine briefly, then returned to the page. But in that glance, I felt everything. The intensity, the hesitation, the unsaid. We were standing on the edge of something, and both of us knew it. What we had done wasn't an accident. It wasn't a product of circumstance or storm or comfort. It was real, and that made it dangerous. That evening, the light in the house shifted as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the walls. She moved through the rooms with quiet confidence, her body familiar now in ways it hadn't been before. I watched her from the kitchen doorway, my eyes following the curve of her back, the swing of her hips, the soft fall of her hair. I wanted to reach for her, to anchor her to me, but I stayed where I was. I wasn't sure what I would do if she turned to me. I wasn't sure what I was allowed to want. We sat side by side on the couch later, legs touching, a blanket draped over both of us. The television played something forgettable. I couldn't focus. My entire body was attuned to hers, her breathing, the slight twitch of her fingers, the way she shifted closer, like gravity was having its way with us. I turned my head slowly, catching her profile in the glow of the screen. She looked calm, but I could see the tension in her jaw, the way her fingers curled into the hem of the blanket. I knew she was feeling it too, that closeness, that pull, that low, aching throb that comes from wanting something you're afraid to name. When she finally rested her head against my shoulder, I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. My hand moved instinctively to her thigh, resting there lightly, my thumb brushing the fabric of her leggings. Her body responded in a subtle shift, leaning in, relaxing. We stayed that way for what felt like hours, wrapped in silence and electricity, too close to call it casual, too still to call it urgent. It wasn't just physical, it was something more, something that lived in the marrow of who we had become to each other. I went to bed before she did. I stood in the doorway to my room, waiting to see if she would follow. She didn't, not right away. I lay in bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling, heart thudding against my ribs, listening to the distant sounds of her moving in the kitchen, the dogs shifting on their beds, the world settling in for the night. When the door creaked open, I turned my head without lifting it from the pillow. She stood there for a moment, silhouetted by the hallway light, then stepped inside, closing the door quietly behind her. She didn't speak, she didn't ask. She just crossed the room and slid under the covers beside me, her body curling toward mine, her hand finding my waist with ease. And in that moment, everything that had been uncertain faded. We had crossed a line, and now we lived in a place where nothing was accidental. The days after that night passed in a kind of slow, muted bloom. Nothing around us changed, and yet everything felt different. The walls were still the same soft beige, the floor still creaked in the same spots, the dogs still scratched at the back door when they wanted to go outside. But the air between us was thicker now, laced with something that moved through each room like smoke, visible only in the corners, in the way our shadows bent toward each other, in the way our fingers brushed and lingered longer than necessary. I could still hear her laugh in the kitchen. I could still feel the press of her thigh against mine on the couch. But now there was a weight to those moments, an echo of the night we stopped pretending. Her body had become familiar in ways I hadn't expected. I noticed everything now, the curve of her spine when she bent to pick something up, the faint freckles on the back of her neck, the soft dip beneath her collarbone where I had pressed my mouth just days ago. I moved through the house with an awareness that bordered on reverence. Every room held a memory. The couch where she first kissed me, the hallway where our shoulders brushed before we even knew what that meant, the kitchen counter where her hand had grazed my lower back, casual but not innocent. My own bedroom had become a space I looked at differently, no longer a private retreat, but a place layered with breath and touch and the warmth of shared sleep. She slipped into my clothes more often now, without asking, without hesitation. I would find her in one of my button-downs, unbuttoned halfway, sleeves rolled to her elbows, the hem brushing the tops of her thighs. She looked so at ease in my space, like it belonged to her, like it had always been hers. And maybe it had. Maybe I had been waiting for this long before I could admit it. I would catch myself staring as she moved through the morning, coffee in one hand, hair twisted up messily, her bare feet tapping softly across the floor. She would glance at me with half a smile, not coy, not teasing, just knowing, as if she could read the pulse in my throat without looking. The quiet between us became a language all its own. She didn't need to speak for me to understand. I knew when she wanted to be touched by the way she leaned into my side, the way her fingers would trace lazy patterns on my wrist, or how she would stand just a little too close in the hallway, her breath warm against my cheek. I responded with my own unspoken signals, a hand resting on her lower back, a thumb brushing across her hip bone as I passed behind her, my lips finding her shoulder in the middle of folding laundry. We existed in a rhythm that was slow, fluid, entirely ours. At night, we didn't rush toward each other. We moved carefully, with a kind of unspoken awe. I would feel the sheets shift as she slid into bed beside me, her skin already warm from the shower, her scent curling into the air like something sacred. She would press her body to mine, not urgently, but with certainty, and I would turn into her, letting my hands learn her again. Every curve, every breath, every quiet noise she made when I touched the places she liked best. Our nights were not chaotic or frenzied. They were deliberate, patient. Her body responded to mine like it remembered me, like it had been waiting to be remembered. She traced patterns on my back with her fingers when we lay together, drawing invisible shapes that made my skin hum. I would close my eyes and breathe her in, feel her thigh hooked over mine, her lips pressed to the hollow of my throat. There was something profound in the way she held me, as if she was afraid I might vanish if she let go. And sometimes, when the night was stillest, when everything outside the room dissolved into silence, I would whisper her name under my breath, not to wake her, not even for her to hear, just to feel the shape of it in my mouth, just to remind myself it was real. She began leaving traces of herself everywhere. A pair of socks tucked into the couch cushions, her toothbrush resting next to mine in the bathroom, her perfume slowly overtaking the drawer where I kept spare candles. I found a strand of her hair on my pillow one morning and kept it, absurdly, between the pages of a book I wasn't reading. It felt like a secret, a talisman, proof that she had been there, that I hadn't imagined any of it. And still, there were moments of fear, fleeting but sharp. I would be washing dishes or folding towels and suddenly wonder what we were doing, what would happen if we had to name it out loud. I had spent years shaping myself around expectations, around duty, around roles, around the kind of silence that keeps everything neat and unspoken. This was none of those things. This was raw, messy, glorious, and I didn't know how to protect it without holding it too tightly. But then she would come up behind me and wrap her arms around my waist, rest her cheek against my back, and the questions would fall quiet. Or she would take my hand while we walked the dogs and rub her thumb in circles over my knuckles, grounding me with that simple, steady touch. Her affection was never loud, but it was constant. It filled all the empty places I had grown used to living with. We never defined it. We didn't need to. It lived in the way she looked at me across the room, in the way my body leaned toward her without thinking, in the way we slept with our legs tangled and our breaths synced in the dark. It lived in the shadows we cast on the bedroom walls, long and interwoven, soft and inseparable. This wasn't a phase. It wasn't a mistake. It was us. And even if the world outside had no name for what we had, I knew what it felt like. It felt like truth, finally given permission to bloom. It felt like the place where I could finally breathe. The morning light spilled into the bedroom in thin, golden slices, cutting across the sheets, the floor, and the curve of her back as she lay beside me. I watched her in silence, my body still heavy with sleep and memory, every inch of my skin humming with the remnants of her touch. Her breath was slow, steady, and I could feel its warmth against my shoulder. One of her arms was draped across my waist, the other tucked beneath her cheek, her fingers curled into the edge of the pillow. I didn't move. I didn't want to disturb the fragile stillness of the moment. Everything inside me ached with the knowledge that I was exactly where I wanted to be, and yet, somewhere deep down, a quiet voice reminded me that this wasn't a place I had ever imagined myself staying. I studied the slope of her shoulder, the tousled strands of hair falling over her ear, the faint shadow of a bruise-colored mark I had left the night before with my mouth. My hand moved without thought, brushing gently down her arm, tracing the soft curve of muscle and skin that now felt impossibly familiar. She shifted slightly, but didn't wake. I closed my eyes and let the warmth between us settle deeper into my chest. The day moved forward slowly, each minute pulled along by something neither of us could name. We didn't speak much. We moved in and out of rooms, brushing past each other like dancers in a familiar choreography. She poured coffee while I toasted bread. I fed the dogs while she opened windows. The air smelt like late summer and sleep, and beneath the scent of soap and clean linens, there was still her, everywhere. Her skin, her breath, the way she had said my name in the dark, not loudly, but like it meant something more than just a sound. We didn't talk about what we were. We didn't talk about what we weren't. The questions lingered in the air between us, unspoken, unanswered, but not ignored. We both felt them, and yet neither of us reached for them. It was easier to live in the silence, to exist in this unmarked space where everything was tender and suspended. But underneath the quiet, I could feel something shifting. The sense that soon we would have to choose, not necessarily between right and wrong, not between desire and duty, but between pretending and acknowledging, between staying quiet and speaking aloud the truth that had already rooted itself beneath our skin. That afternoon, I found her in the garden. She was kneeling beside the tomato plants, pulling weeds with her bare hands, dirt clinging to her fingers. Her hair was tied back with a piece of string, and a smear of soil ran across her cheek. I stood in the doorway and watched her, my throat tightening around something I didn't know how to swallow. She looked up and caught my eye, and in that brief glance, I saw it. Everything. The fear, the hope, the soft, devastating recognition of what we had become. I stepped outside and knelt beside her, my hands joining hers in the earth. We didn't say anything, but our shoulders touched, and for a long time, that was enough. That night, she didn't come to bed right away. I lay in the dark and listened to the faint sounds of her moving through the house, the creak of the stairs, the whisper of fabric, the quiet closing of a cabinet door. When she did finally appear, she paused at the threshold, silhouetted by the hallway light. Her eyes found mine in the dark, and she walked toward me slowly, slipping under the covers without a word. Her body curled into mine, her arm wrapping around my ribs, her forehead pressing into the space beneath my chin. I held her close, my hand on her back, feeling the rhythm of her breath match my own. In the silence that followed, a choice settled into me. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet and firm, like the closing of a door or the turning of a key. I chose her. Not because it was easy, not because it was expected, but because something inside me had shifted in a way that couldn't be undone. Because she had reached a part of me that I had long stopped offering. Because even in the silence, Even without declarations or promises or names, she had become something permanent. There was no conversation the next morning, no plans made, no futures mapped out. But when she reached for my hand across the kitchen counter and held it, just for a moment longer than she needed to, I knew she had chosen to. I felt it in the way our fingers intertwined. I felt it in the way she leaned against me as we stood watching the dogs run circles in the yard. I felt it in the quiet, grounded peace of being near her, of no longer needing to question the shape of what we were building. The world around us remained unchanged. People walked their dogs past the house. Birds sang their usual songs. The mail arrived at noon. But something inside me had been rewritten, delicately and entirely. I had stepped into a life I hadn't planned, into a truth I hadn't looked for, and I wasn't afraid. I didn't need permission. I didn't need to explain it to anyone. I only needed to live it, to honor it, to wake up each morning with her beside me and let that be enough. We still didn't speak about it, but everything we did said the same thing. Every glance, every touch, every shared breath in the dark. We had made a choice. And even if the rest of the world never knew what it meant, we did. And that was all that mattered.